conversation and advice in every one of the sessions, and we will do everything that we can in the back end to ensure that things run smoothly for you. Because it's a live event, though, we welcome you and encourage you to participate. You can see a chat box at the right-hand side of your screen. Please introduce yourself, comment, and provide any questions there, and we'll do our best to address those throughout the day. Some logistics: if you're planning on attending multiple panels in a row or the whole day, you've already done everything that you need to do, so you'll be automatically moved from one session to the next session. You may see a brief waiting room, but that will just be 2 or 3 minutes, and then you'll automatically move to the next session once that's in progress. If you plan to drop into sessions, that's great too. Please just visit the Big Marker Business Unusual homepage, and you'll see a pop-up to join the webinar that's in progress, so you can come and go at your convenience. And with that, that is definitely plenty for me. I'm really excited to introduce our next panel. It's called Above the Noise: How to Communicate with Your Customers During COVID. Our moderator is Dave Tabor. Dave is the host of the ProCo 360 podcast. That's a pro-business podcast in Colorado. It also just received Denver's Best Podcast Award for the 3rd year in a row, and you will know why when you meet Dave. So Dave, I'll hand it over to you, and thank you to all of the speakers on this panel.
Well, thanks so much, Jessica. I'm happy to be here. And as Jessica mentioned, I do host the ProCo 360 podcast. I'm also an executive of the Colorado Chamber of Commerce. And I know you, like I, want to get better at communicating above the noise during this crisis. And I look forward to that today. We're underway, so please forgive me for looking away from the camera. That's where my notes are. So I'm joined today by Amanda ReCupido of Public Communications, Inc., and Heather Whaling, founder and president of Geben Communications. Today's session is going to start with Amanda making some opening remarks about communicating with internal audiences, followed by Heather, who will speak about external audiences. They're each going to speak for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. And then I'm going to ask some questions about midway through that. We're going to start watching for your questions in chat, so we'll work them into the session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to make some opening comments. Thanks, Amanda.
Great. Thanks, Dave. And hello, everyone, from a very chilly but sunny Chicago. So I have a background in nonprofit communications, which is where the lens of my remarks will come from. And nonprofits, as everyone is hit very hard by COVID. We're seeing some clients having to end their programming completely, or at least pause it. This is gala season, and that's definitely affecting the donor pipeline. And there's some challenges from some social service providers of how to still reach those vulnerable communities when they typically rely on volunteers or material donations, and now that's not a possibility. So finding those creative solutions to maybe reach existing partners or new partners so that they can still meet their missions. But I did want to, as we're talking about rising above the noise, share a couple of those internal examples that I think were some unique solutions. So the first was a National Association of Camps, so summer camps across the country, and wanting to know, how do we communicate with our employees, with our seasonal staff, and with parents about the big question: is there going to be summer camp this summer? So we very quickly got on a webinar to talk about, if you don't have a crisis plan in place now, here's how you quickly put one together. Here are all the audiences you need to talk to. Here's the cadence of how you do it: family first, board, donor, staff, and then external audiences. And here's the tone that you need to take. Here's what we know currently. Here's what we don't know. Here's when we expect we might know it. But please, be patient with us as we are all experiencing this together. And that remaining true to mission, summer camp is a great time for kids to explore the outdoors, to learn new skills. So what are some of those virtual offerings they can share now? Are there backyard scavenger hunts or living room crafts that they can provide? So really working through with this association to empower their members to have this consistent message now nationwide to deal with their own individual situations. And then the second example I wanted to share is with a global philanthropy organization who very quickly realized that this is an opportunity to take a thought leadership position about their contributions in general in philanthropy. So reaching out to nearly 1,000 charitable organizations around the world about how they're affected by COVID-19. So seeing some charities getting an influx of donations because they are direct providers to health and human services, and others, such as arts organizations maybe not being thought of as much right now? Or are there those high-level donors who are saying very much arts is important to me and getting a very large donation more than usual? So very quickly putting out, and nothing fancy, just a survey monkey, but crunching those numbers and putting together a webinar for their own donors and members, for industry peers, and also for media as a way to share their expertise and information. And since then, they've also done podcasts and other resources about how COVID-19 is affecting philanthropy and nonprofits. But again, thinking about what value do they have to add, what is their overall business mission and goal, and how can they take this as a way to be creative with their communications to still meet that.
Good. Thank you, Amanda. Thanks for the overview. Let's turn over to Heather for her perspective for external audiences. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dave. So my name is Heather Whaling. I'm the CEO of Geben Communication. We are based here in Columbus, Ohio. Interestingly, our governor has been one of the ones who acted very early. So we've been, that has really impacted how a lot of our clients have been navigating all of this the last few weeks. We also have a presence in Chicago, but we're working with clients all across the country. So from an external communication standpoint, that's a lot of different audiences and stakeholders to be keeping tabs on and modifying communication around. Normally, my agency does proactive public relations. We're doing a lot of thought leadership and media relations, event visibility and event planning. The other kind of bucket of our services is around digital, so social media campaigns, community management, influencer outreach, and then we have an insights and an analytics service. I think if we've learned anything in the last month, though, there's really nothing normal about what we're facing. So for just about all of our clients, we've had to shift the work that we're doing away from some of that very positive, proactive work and more to issues and crisis communication. I was counting it up the other day. I think at one point we were working on 33 different crisis communication or issue communication plans at the same time. And it's been interesting. All the different industries have been hit in different ways, and so communicating with both internal and external stakeholders has been interesting and a challenge. I think we're starting to see now we've sort of moved past that initial triage standpoint from a communications perspective, and we're moving more towards, okay, this is the reality that we're in, and so what does that mean? So working with companies in a couple different ways. So first, a lot of what we're doing is very news cycle driven. So watching the governor's update every day in our state and then other states where we have key clients, paying attention to the White House briefings, the daily briefings there, trying to understand what announcements are coming up and figuring out if our clients have something of value to add into that news cycle. So for example, when it was just starting to be announced, that sort of slow roll that schools were being closed, we were working with a startup in Seattle that quickly pivoted what they were doing to be, they were working on a childcare startup and quickly pivoted, recognizing that there was an enormous need for essential workers, especially to have access to childcare. So we worked with them to line up media so that they could share the story of what they were doing and how people could access childcare in that moment. But that was something that it was, as soon as the couple of districts started to close, we were able to jump on that right away. Same thing, we're working with a client now. So, there's been a lot of conversation about face masks the last few weeks. And yesterday, Governor Cuomo said that, New York is required to wear them, I think now. In Ohio, they're talking about how, and I think the same thing in Chicago, that even as things start to return back to normal, you're going to need to have your face mask when you're going to work or traveling to and from locations. And so we're working with a company called Philanthropy. They were an HVAC manufacturing company, and they completely changed their focus area. Instead of providing filters, they're now providing a layer that can go inside all these masks that individuals are making. And so working with Good Housekeeping and other media and influencers to help get that news out right away. So there's a lot right now that's happening from a news cycle monitoring standpoint. But then we're also, as the conversation has shifted, even in the last 2 or 3 days, it feels like there's been a pretty drastic shift around starting to talk about reopening The governor today said that the goal here is to start to reopen a little bit in beginning of May. I think there's the coalitions of governors on either coast are starting to have those conversations. So now working with brands to start planning not only, okay, what are we doing in April, but what does it start to look like as we maybe reopen the country or start to reemerge? And there's a lot of sensitivity there because people have experienced this crisis in a variety of different ways. And some people have had great loss of jobs and family members or friends. Other people have been greatly inconvenienced, but not maybe to the same level. And so trying to manage those customer interactions, recognizing that you have to communicate, but your audience has gone through a pretty traumatic situation, which means you can't communicate how you were communicating in January and February. It just won't work as well.
Hey, Heather, I'm going to ask a straight off question from that. And if you're dealing with news cycles and things are changing so fast every day or every 2 to 3 days, people that you hire as consultants in communications, especially, pride themselves on being strategic. So when you're in full on reactive mode, how do you stay strategic?
So part of our job, I think, at this moment in time is to help provide good counsel to our clients about when is it appropriate to try and insert yourself in the news cycle versus when do you just need to take a step back because there are other people who need that airtime or need to have their voices and their stories heard. So there is a strategic element of this. Not every client should be trying to fit into the news cycle right now. And so there's a lot of strategy around making sure that it's the right moment in time for you to try to insert yourself. Because the worst thing you could do right now is try to look like you're capitalizing on a pandemic, on a national crisis. That will do far more harm to your brand than just sitting down.
And I mean, the title of this is Above the Noise, and yet it seems that everybody feels they have to speak about COVID-19 in whatever context they feel like it. And it seems to me that it's just creating a larger and larger sort of cacophony. And so, when you think about, does everyone need to speak about it? Period.
I don't think so. I mean, especially at this point, right? Like by now you've probably closed your business already if you were going to. If you've altered your service or product offering because of this, you've probably already communicated that. So at this point, I think the focus is really on if you have something of value to add to the conversation, or if you have something that will materially impact your audience, then sure, absolutely, you should share it. But if you're just sending an email out to be in the top of people's inboxes and say, hey, we're being careful too, I don't think that's necessary at this point.
Yeah. Amanda, what do you think?
Yeah, completely agree. And it's not only what do you have to add, but who needs to hear it. So you might not need to send an email blast to everyone who's ever interacted with your business, depending on what that message is. If it's a very important safety issue, then maybe. But if not, only reaching those audiences where they are. If it's a thank you to essential workers, that could be a social media post. It doesn't need to be on every single channel. But I also really appreciated, Heather, what you said about the communicating when we're coming back. Because this is business unusual and we're not going back to business as usual either. And we have some culture tourism clients that are quiet right now. They said, okay, here's what's postponed. We'll keep you posted. Maybe there's some fun virtual crowdsourcing interaction on social media. But other than that, there's not a lot to say right now. But what they can do is plan for when they are open, what that's going to look like. Is it that 50% capacity? How are the safety measures being changed? Because those arts, culture, tourism organizations right now are going to want to come back, double the time when we are finally able to get there.
So keeping that in mind, and you think about the tone of messaging, how does that, what's the nuance as you move from, the reactive initial thing that was happening to this, what companies will want to do, which is become, we're moving forward, we're optimistic. And how do you manage the nuance of the tone and the messaging, even over the next few days and weeks?
I think it's a very fine line. And I think you need to understand your audience really, really well. I would say as much of it as possible, root in your values. So if you, hopefully you are a company that has clearly articulated what your values are, and I would use those as the basis for your communication. And if you're staying true to who you are as a company, then I think you're going to insulate a little bit from some of the criticism and look like you're trying to capitalize on it.
Okay, so how about an example? That's a big generality.
Yeah, so we have a company that we work with where one of their values, they're in the food service space, and they're an essential business. So they have been able to stay open So it's a fine line of we're providing food and we're open, but also we're taking all the necessary precautions. So one of their values is around trust. And so a big part of the content that we have been creating with them is sharing why you can trust that we're taking this seriously, why you can trust that we're taking all the precautions necessary. And so that, I think, rooting it in that trust piece has sort of created a space where we can have that conversation. At the same time, another one of their values is hospitality. So we are talking about that you can order food from us and you can have it, but we're doing it through the lens of a hospitality, and even at home, having that hospitality is important with your family. And what does that look like? So I think that is a little bit of a better approach than just, hey, order from us, we're open.
Yeah. When you mentioned different audiences, and so as you think about sort of, you've both been around the communications world for a while. So there are traditional media, and then there are things like social media. To what extent do you change the tone, the messaging, and all that across the spectrum of the kinds of media that you're delivering messages through?
When we're communicating anything, there's got to be a blend of facts and empathy. And just because social media has been the more casual platform, this is still a time of crisis where people are dying. Jokes are never appropriate. That being said, if there are opportunities for levity not related to this crisis, especially from an internal audience perspective, some major companies who have, Workplace or Slack, those are opportunities to celebrate the wins. And we're fatigued by COVID messaging right now. So if there is a space for that, to move away from that, that's okay.
Well, I've seen some, look, we've all seen really funny things that make us laugh during this crisis, whether they're the homegrown dancing videos or jokes or whatever the case. It strikes me that those are appropriate when they're from individuals. They're probably never appropriate when they're from companies. That's my, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think you hit it right on the head. Yeah.
I think so. I would hate to hesitate. I hesitate to say it's never appropriate from brand if that's your brand and that's your, if you're a comedy club, maybe there is a space where you can have some comedy.
Okay.
But I think that goes back to who are you as a brand, and if you're not normally a comedian, jokester brand, this is not the time to try that.
Well, I would think too, you don't want one of your team members to share something that he or she thinks is funny, along with the corporate stuff, because that's part of their personal brand, but it's not, I think it's a sensitive time.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of need to remember that community management, the community part of it, is still really important, right? So we talk about social media, but the act of posting and updating and all that stuff is supposed to be the act of community management. So thinking about how are you using this to build community, oftentimes the brand can be, you can take like a hub and spoke model. So how is the brand helping people have this sense of community in this time right now where it is so, where I think people are yearning for community. And so then you sort of a little bit can help take the brand and some of those sort of thorny issues out of it and really position yourself more as how are you helping people in the comments or in the replies interacting with each other.
That's a really good point. An article I read was bringing us back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how until the crisis, we were all, many of us, especially those on this call, were near the top. We're really focused on self-actualizing. And now people are focused, more to where they want a sense of security. And messaging, it seems, ought to be changing to create that emotion as opposed to, maybe higher up the pyramid. Well,
and I think that people, especially people who have been in states where they have been home for longer than maybe other parts of the country, I think this has drastically changed what people think is important. It's going to be, we were talking before this of, I think everyone's getting real comfortable in their very casual leggings and their kind of at-home work attire.
I'm wearing Crocs.
People are changing their spending habits as a result of this. And, I think there is going to be a shift. So I think brands that think you're just going to be able to go back to communicating how you were in January and February, you're going to come off very tone deaf, that, it's a whole new ball game. And yes, just because maybe the country is starting to reopen and maybe hopefully we'll see some glimmers of economic recovery sooner than later, that doesn't mean that communication just goes back to the plans you had drafted a few months ago.
And crises like this exacerbate what's been working well and what hasn't been with some companies. So if a company hasn't been, and we're looking at larger companies, hasn't been treating their workers appropriately, and they're saying, oh, thank you, that's not going to show off as authentically as some other brands. Or if they're having layoffs, they need to communicate what are all the steps that they have taken, that was the last resort. And again, leading with empathy and showing, being very transparent, those are all more important now than ever.
Yeah. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the new normal and how that impacts the way we communicate. We're all on video conference right now. What challenges and opportunities do you think this notion of all of us being on video communications now presents for companies?
We're all broadcasters now. And I think in many ways, brands have always been shifting into their own media platforms. So when we're all on video conferences on Zoom all day, it's keeping those media training tips in mind. So are you presentable? Are you feeling engaged? And keeping all of those in mind. And that's what we're coaching our clients to do as well. Because we're seeing, even if it's an internal meeting, it's still a business meeting. There's still room for that humanity, especially, people who have kids at home, and we're kind of getting a glimpse into everyone's lives. So there's a balance between professionalism and coming to ourselves in the workplace as our full selves.
We think a lot about workplace policies. I think it's going to make it really hard for a lot of companies who had been very anti-remote work or anti-flexible work schedules to continue down that road, because now all of a sudden there are lots of people and lots of businesses who have figured out how to work remotely, and video has been a huge piece of that. Yep. The other thing that I think is helpful is from a media standpoint. I think media has gotten much more comfortable doing interviews via Zoom and Skype and other tools. And so if you're thinking about from a media relations standpoint, maybe before you would get locked out of some of the major media on the coast because you couldn't physically be in studio, that it may reopen some opportunities because they are using new technology in different ways.
Yeah, that's cool. Hey, I've got a question from the audience. I'm going to read it. Everyone has sent the what our company is doing about COVID messages. My company has slowed down in general, but I want to keep in touch with people without just sending what everyone else is. Are there examples of a unique approach you've seen that is appropriate but different?
I think this is a really interesting time for brands to be collaborating. So when brands maybe themselves have had to pause or slow down drastically, or maybe it's just shifted a little bit how they're operating. But I think we're seeing some very interesting, unique collaborations happening between retailers and nonprofits, between other for-profit, food providers and healthcare, getting food to healthcare workers. So I think maybe I would go about it less from the perspective of, I don't want to send the email, but instead, what is a program or what is something you can create that is worth communicating about? And once you have something that's worth communicating about, then you can send the email and do the social.
What's an example? What's an example you guys have seen?
Yeah, so we're working with a nonprofit here. It has sprung up in the midst of all this. It's called Service Relief Kitchen, and it was started by 3 restaurateurs, 2 of whom had shut down their restaurants, 1 who had switched to just a delivery and takeout method. And when so many hospitality workers are laid off, and I didn't know this before, but most hospitality workers are not eligible for unemployment. So all of a sudden you have these people who are making a lower wage to begin with and now have no job and really very little safety net. They are having trouble putting food on the table. So there are 3 different restaurateurs who've come together, and they had solicited funds, and now they're providing 400 meals a day. So they've gotten other local chefs to help come and cook the food, and they've got distribution sites set up. But it's been funded partially through another collaboration that had been put together in town of a number of different nonprofits and businesses that came together to raise a bunch of money. Cool. So I thought that was great collaboration of people using their unique skill set to solve a need.
Yeah,
and then they have something interesting to talk about, right? That's different. Amanda, do you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, and I think a lot of nonprofits are just putting up an emergency fund and thinking about all the donations are going to be flowing. So I think one example that's been helpful there, and I alluded to it before, where there's a service provider who cannot get donations to then give to their audiences. So they worked with a partner. The greatest need right now are diapers. So they worked where they actually purchased the diapers and were able to distribute them. Now, usually we would maybe send a media alert and get some cameras out and get some coverage that way. So we had to be creative. And I think, Heather, to your point about, media is now more willing to just accept photos or accept, as we're all content creators, sending that as a tool for them to just post and go ahead and do that. And that's a way to draw attention where, oh yeah, and by the way, they have an emergency fund, but here is how they're directly providing. To the question too, it's if you want to stay in touch, again, what is the goal? Is it one-on-one phone calls with your customers, or does it need to be a mass communication? But it all goes back to what you want that action item to be.
Got it. One thing, you both are pretty senior in your background and your ability to consult with your clients, and generally at a higher level. The thing I wonder is, all of your clients had goals, well-established, well-communicated goals and objectives before any of this started. And now most of the leaders are talking about what to do, in reaction. So how do you help them communicate in a way that they're not telling their team or that we've abandoned all of our future goals and objectives in order to do this? I mean, how do you manage that nuance between responsiveness and reaction, and the idea that this company had long-range plans and you're going to go back to them?
Yeah, there was a panel yesterday, and I'm forgetting which session, but someone gave this great metaphor about pivoting. Like, you always keep one foot down as you're pivoting. And we have these goals. We might need to be realistic about changing the strategies to get there, or the objectives against which we're measuring our success. But the goals are laid out there for a reason. And speaking about, communicating above the noise and, communicating when we get back to business, the new business as usual, is what are those foundational plans and groundwork we can lay now so that the company is set up for the best success? Because this isn't just a now problem. It's a 6 months from now, it's the next year.
Yeah.
The business is going to be looking different. And so let's adjust our expectations accordingly.
Yeah. Heather, there's a question from the audience directed to you. You've mentioned community. I've been brainstorming how to communicate beyond email or social. What are your thoughts on hosting a virtual roundtable with your community on Zoom or other Zoom gatherings for your community?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of that happen organically anyway, with people having virtual happy hours or, virtual this and that and the other thing. So I think that's a great idea. We're getting ready to launch an influencer campaign that is designed. We are working with a client who has created a series of activities that kids and families can do at home to do good in their communities still. And we're doing a briefing with influencers and the executive director via Zoom. So I think Zoom can be used in a lot of different ways. We were on a call yesterday with a music focused group. And normally it's a program that is happening inside of schools, and that obviously can't happen now. So we were having conversations about how do you to Amanda's point, how do you pivot? So you have the seed of what works, but can you do something on the weekend? Maybe kids and parents could do it together. But I think there's a ton of value in Zoom. I think people are watching so much. I would love to see someone do this. I don't know if someone's done it yet, but there's that Mrs. Americana show on Hulu that just came out. I'd love for someone to organize a viewing party. Go watch it yourself and then come on Zoom and have a conversation with other people who are interested in that kind of content. I think that's a great place where you can help bring people together. Chipotle on a large scale end of this, Chipotle has been doing Zoom kind of lunches. I think they're having celebrities come in and their community can interact with them. So you can do it on a big scale like that, but I also think there's a ton of value doing it on a small scale. And a lot of these services have tools where you can all be in one session together, and then you can go to kind of virtual breakout rooms. So there's a lot of value there, I think.
Yeah, theaters have been doing this really well too, where typically before pre-COVID, you would never have theater streaming. And now very smartly, some of them are behind paywall, some of them are not. So as if you're going to the theater and having a party with your friends, going to the theater, and then it's whetting this appetite for when we are back and we are able to go in person, you've already made that connection with that organization, and not just streaming on their websites, but also some Facebook Lives, which I've found has been very interesting. Sometimes these donations are full ticket price, sometimes they're $5. So it's a nice way to get access of all different types of audiences.
Yeah, that's cool. And
building off the Facebook Live part, I think Instagram Live is having a moment. It seems, whether it's the DJ Nice and his party every night, or even I work with a meditation coach, and he's doing guided meditations at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. I think every day. So it could be, a semi-celebrity, or it could be just an individual person. But there's a lot of, Zoom is one channel, but all the live options, I think, also could create newfound senses of community.
Thank you. And the word Zoom has become a bit of a verb these days, right? But I want to point out that the supporter of our sessions now is Big Marker, and there are alternatives for those who wish to find them. So we appreciate Big Marker's support for the program here. Go back to this before as we kind of wind down a little bit. We've got a few minutes left. I'm still intrigued by this notion of staying above the noise, and I think it's hard to do because everybody wants to be part of it fast and get in it. And I think if we don't slow down a little, just a little, it's easy to become part of the noise and not above the noise. What do you guys think of that?
We always say in a crisis, you have more time to react than you think. And I think you're exactly right. There was that first wave of a knee-jerk reaction, an abundance of caution, health and safety, which are all valid messages. And now we're seeing, how do we keep that conversation going? And if you don't have anything to add to the conversation, don't add to it. Wait until you have news to share and be thoughtful about that. Because if you are taking those steps to plan, you actually have something worthwhile to say, and people are going to hear that and it's going to resonate more.
Yeah.
I would say try and find opportunities where you can add to the calm instead of adding to the chaos. There's a lot of chaos right now and a lot of anxiety. And if you're not able to kind of tell the difference of, are you helping here or are you just adding to the noise, it's probably not worth sharing.
Thank you. And Heather, what you just said, I'm going to come back as we wrap up in a minute. I'm going to come back and ask you both to come up with one really good example of someone who stopped, thought, and is doing something that's above the noise. First, I've got one more audience question at least. Are there any B2B brands doing Facebook or Instagram Live really well?
I'm sure there are. I don't know.
I'm just putting you guys on the spot. Yeah.
Off of my head. That's a good question. I think I can think of more consumer brands who are probably doing that live. I would imagine a lot of the B2B brands are probably doing it on tools like this or more like webinar oriented tools than more of those consumer oriented ones.
Yeah, maybe the question is a little more generic because, the person asked about Facebook or Instagram Live. I mean, couldn't you use any video tool live and do it B2B? And I think the answer to that one is clearly yes. Colorado Chamber just put together a program last week where we asked business leaders to get together and share the things that they've done that make them most proud of how they've reacted to the COVID-19 crisis and sharing those ideas. And then they actually were asking each other questions about, how they did it, what they did. And, I think that does address a B2B audience, maybe not on Instagram or Facebook, but along those lines.
Yeah. I'm part of a Facebook group for agency owners, and it's been very active since all of this went on. People kind of just sharing, here's what we're seeing, here's what you're seeing. If you had this happen, what would you do? Here's what I'm doing. And so that is a good example of a Facebook group that's being used really effectively from a B2B standpoint.
Yeah. Okay, so last question for both of you. What is a really good example of someone that has stopped, not become part of the noise, but become above the noise? What did they do and what did that look like?
I'm going to use a non-client example of just some things that I thought were really well done. And it's actually just my yoga studio. I think a lot of fitness and other like retail are really holding on hard to the old way of business, which has already just shifted so much in just a month. But then having those virtual offerings and really functioning, I'm feeling more connected and participating more often. And I'm feeling much more positively about the business because of the way that they've been able to pivot. It's a local Chicago studio in the suburbs called Yoga by Degrees. So give them a shout out. And also I just saw an ad and I know there's a lot of Twitter chat about all coronavirus ads being the same right now. And many of them are. And again, where it makes sense, where it's like, why did they need a COVID commercial? Lowe's, and I don't know much about how else they're reacting to workers or anything during this, but showing how much we are doing at home. And it was a very comforting, positive message, and it made sense because people are in their homes. I thought that was really well done.
Cool. Heather, what comes to mind? Actually, before you give your example, I want to wrap on your example, but I've got one more question it looks like from an audience member, which is, how about some quick tips for things to avoid, not to do during this time?
make sure, don't pre-schedule a whole lot of content. Like if you're trying to schedule your posts all through April, I'd be real concerned about that because things are changing so fast. So don't do that. Don't blast email reporters. Don't assume that you know a reporter's beat. I think reporters right now are on all different kinds of beats. There's sports reporters who are covering coronavirus news because there's not sports to be covering like normal. So make sure you're doing your homework before you send any pitches out. Otherwise, you're going to end up pitching the wrong person probably. So I think a lot of it is, don't rush with your communication. Make sure you're taking the time to do the research and your homework so you'll be much more effective.
Amanda?
I would say don't do anything that isn't authentic to your brand and yourself. I think this is an opportunity to take calculated risks because, again, this is business unusual, but remaining true to who you are.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to have Heather answer that last question, which will be our send-off question. And Heather, or Amanda, you've already answered it. Heather, what example do you see of somebody doing things really well, really strategically, and very effectively in communicating now?
Yeah, so I mentioned before, I think Chipotle has done a pretty interesting job in the midst of all of this. I think McCormick, the steak company, the steak restaurant, I think they've done an interesting job of providing kind of some at-home examples. There's a local bakery place here called Fox in the Snow, and they have these biscuits that are amazing, and they released their biscuit recipe. So for Easter, my Instagram feed was just everybody making Fox in the Snow biscuits. And I thought that was a really clever way of taking something that your people are missing and just making it available.
That's pretty cool. Hey, let's wrap up there. We've got maybe 30 seconds left and seems like a good time to wrap. I want to thank Heather and Amanda for joining me today and thank Click Studios for putting together this session as part of Business Unusual. Let's wrap it there. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.